Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are at pedalshift.net/225, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or text us at 202-930-1109, and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 225th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. It feels like a milestone-ish kind of episode. My name's Tim Mooney. I'm your host here, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about extending the life of your touring bike based on listener questions. So that's going to be a fun little topic for us here as we close out the original shows here in the month of November. I just wanted to give a quick heads up, now that we are in the housekeeping section of the show, that I'm going to be doing a special two-parter for the best of. That means that the next 2 weeks are going to be a combined best of. It's a rebroadcast of a Brompton tour that I did out in the Pacific Northwest a couple of years ago, and I think it's perfect for the holiday season. It was a lot of fun. It was challenging, interesting. We talked about the kind of cruddy weather rides on the last episode. This was a cruddy weather ride, let me tell you. So I hope you all enjoy that. It's going to be released on Thanksgiving Day here in the States next week, part 1, and then the following Thursday as well, part 2. So doing a little bit of extra time off for this part of the holiday season. Hope you enjoy it. I think that it will be a fine replacement for you listening to me yak away about new things. Also in the housekeeping section, hey, apparently you all listened to this thing. I'm told the last 30 days, we have ranked rather highly in the places and travel category, or at least I think it's rather highly. It seems high to me, in a variety of different countries, not the United States, which I am super excited about. Let's start off with France, number 18, as high as that. Also as high as number 18 in the Philippines, or Philippines. I know Ukraine, we don't like saying the Ukraine anymore. I said the Philippines. I wonder if it's just Philippines. I'm going to say Philippines. Philippines. Position 18. Slovenia, our old friends in Slovenia, ranked as high as number 14 there in places and travel. Now we start to get to the exciting ones. Finland, hello my Finnish friends. Number 12, as high as number 12 in the last 30 days. And finally, down under, but not that down under, New Zealand, ranked in the top 10, number 9 in places and travel. That is super exciting for somebody like me. I have been to precisely almost none of these countries. I've only been to France, but that's really exciting. Slovenia, if you recall, had us at number 4 about 100 episodes back or so. So it's nice to be back in the listener categories there. But I'm going to tell you, it's the France one that will have my Francophile partner green with jealousy. Big thank you to all the folks across the globe who listen to the ramblings of this American with cabin fever. And I hope that idiom for someone tired of being inside translates. I don't have an actual fever. All right. On this episode, it is back to Gear Talk. We haven't had a Gear Talk section in, it feels like, many a moon. So Gear Talk, extending the life of your touring bike. I got a text from a listener, and I don't have a name here. So thank you, listener, who texted in. By the way, everybody, don't forget you can text us there on the hotline 202-930-1109. And the listener asks, if I got to scroll here for that, the listener said, I wonder if you would at some point discuss your bike. You are unique in that you don't push out content about buying the latest and greatest upgrades or technology. I'd like to know more about how you have gotten so many years out of your bike, including tips on maintenance and what the most important upgrades have been for your bike's longevity. Great question. I will say, I think that bikes generally can be very long-lived if you buy something that isn't junky to begin with. I think a steel frame bike has the potential to behave and live longer than others. I think if you've got good quality parts that are part of your bicycle, I think that's really good. But I want to talk a little bit more about that, and I want to kind of break it out step by step. just some thoughts about all of that. I'm not sure if my bike is necessarily super long-lived. I know people that are riding all sorts of vintage bikes and they ride them pretty hard. I do have a vintage bike, era 90s, mid 90s, I think, in Portland at my brother's place. And of course, it doesn't get a ton of riding because I'm not out there very often. But when I am out there, it goes off on a big long tour with me. But the same things apply to a brand new bike as well. If you take care of it, it's gonna be lasting much longer for you. And no disrespect to the latest and greatest. I do have a Brompton. The Brompton's only a few years old. It was definitely the latest and greatest when I got it. But, ride your ride. Get the bike that makes the most sense for you. But when you get it, here's some tips on how to make this, live a little bit longer. So the first thing that I want to talk about are things around the brakes. So we're talking either brake pads for your rim braked bikes and disc brake rotors and all of the hardware around that. I throw that into quotes just because all of the mechanisms that make that thing go, because there's tons of springs and all sorts of crazy stuff in there that frankly, I don't know much about. There is a certain point when brakes aren't working. If I get them real cleaned up, that's when I'm like, you know what, it's just probably a cable thing. And I'll talk about cables in a little bit. But, your brakes wear out. This is probably the number one consumable that you have when it comes to riding your bicycle. If you're doing tons of hills, which means you're doing lots of downhills, if you're just braking hard a lot, these are the types of things that end up wearing out over time. Let me start off with rim brakes because that's what I'm most familiar with. I actually don't have a bike with disc brake rotors, so disc brakes at all. The bikes that have pads, there's usually on your pad a line where once it wears down to that point, you should replace it. I'll be honest, I replace mine probably a little bit more frequently than that. Only because it's, I find that there's better performance when there's like more to them. And I think that that's kind of an important thing for you to have. Sorry, you're probably hearing all of my dogs running around in the background. They're being extra crazy tonight. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I would say is this is a place where you really want to, if you're not really good about bike maintenance or you're not really good about anything, let me encourage you to do one thing. If you've got rim brakes, make sure those things are as clean as possible, especially if you're riding trails, especially if you're going through grit, especially if you've just had some rain, because if you've got any grit that gets between your pad and your rim, that's going to wear out your rim pretty quickly over time. And that's an expensive part to replace, and that's going to wear it down more. So keep those things clean as much as possible. The one thing that I think is sort of a must-have necessity for rim brake people is know how to decouple that brake so that it kind of opens up and be able to wipe that kind of down. And don't use anything like slippery when you do that. Just, kind of wipe them down with, a rag or something like that. And then reattach it. If you don't know how to do that, I would really recommend that you do, because that's the best way to really get in there and make sure that those are cleaned up. Now, for disc brakes, I do know a thing or two about them, even though I'm not an owner of disc braked bike. You're not going to have to worry about worn out rims if you have disc brakes. I think that most modern touring bikes are largely going to be disc brakes these days. Would I buy my next bike with a disc brake? Probably. I just think that there's a lot of a lot to say about them. You got to make sure that those are clean too. Now, those pads are not very expensive, but they do get worn over time. So you want to, if you keep them clean, you'll minimize the wearing process on those. You really want to make sure, especially for those, that you're avoiding doing anything when you're doing other maintenance on your bike that involves things like lube, or if you're cleaning, getting soap on there or anything like that, because I'm here to tell you, if you have something slippery on your disc brake rotors, well, that's going to be a problem. You're not going to actually stop, and you will find that is not fun. So anyways, that's my tip on all of that. The next thing I want to talk about is your drivetrain. Now, this is an area where it's important that you have, I think, good quality cassettes and chains. I don't think that having an inexpensive chain is going to be a bad thing for you, but inexpensive parts often are not made as well and don't last as long. So, don't cheap out on that. Most cassettes and things like that, if you've got a shifting bike, of course, if you've got an internal hub, you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. Most of those types of things are important to also keep clean. But here's the other thing you got to do, and we all know I do a terrible job at this. Make sure things are lubricated as well. You want to make sure that you are cleaning that down and lubricating as much as possible, because what ends up happening is that you'll get wear over time. If your chain is dirty and you ride a lot, again, more grit gets in there. And that's another thing that's going to wear things down. Now, I will tell you that cassettes and chains, they're also consumables. You're going to go through those things, but that doesn't mean you got to throw your bike away. I can't even count the number of times I've replaced cassettes and front chain rings and things like that on this bike, on my Safari, at least 3 or 4 times, if memory serves, past the original one that came with it. They wear down. They don't wear down as much as brake pads, I don't think. But once every other season, I'm finding I'm having to change those out. So make sure that you're doing that. They do make special tools. Park makes a tool that is a chain stretch checker. There is a certain point when your chain is stretched too much and it's going to create problems for shifting. Also, it's going to wear down your cassette even more. When you replace the chain, you're probably going to want to replace your cassette at about the same time. That's the general rule. And if you take your bike into any local bike shop, that's what they're going to encourage you to do. They're not trying to upcharge you. They're just telling you what is probably the best way to go about it. By the way, when you have a new chain and a new cassette, oh man, it feels real different. You don't realize how crappy your ride was before until you put on that new stuff. This could be maybe $100, could be a couple $100. Depends on what your bike is and what you're doing and how much they charge you to change that all out if you're paying somebody to do it like I do. But you know what? That's way cheaper than buying a brand new bike. And, yeah, I've done it 3 or 4 times, but that's not even approaching the cost of a brand new bike. Well, maybe it's getting somewhat close to that. But you know what? I'd rather do it this way because it's less waste and, I'm getting a lot more out of the bike that way. So yeah, make sure the drivetrain is something you pay attention to. Keep it clean too. Don't skimp on that, even though I'm terrible at it. Even though, do as I say, don't as I do. We'll just put it that way. Cables. All right. These are mysteries to me. I am not a very good bike mechanic. I aspire to be, but cables are the things that I find if there's any issue with cables, I am bringing it to a shop right away. Part of it is because there are a few special tools that you will need in order to handle cables, special cutters and different types of things. And frankly, it's generally not the type of thing that I've been all that interested in doing. I'd much rather support the local bike shop and have them handle that. They stretch. They get gunked up inside of the housing. So you got to make sure that you are kind of paying attention to things. There's not a lot that you can do from a maintenance perspective. I do know some people swear by, putting in some types of lubricant. There are special cable lubricants and things like that. Frankly, I don't do that. The one thing that you can do that might be a little bit more helpful, when there are cables that go outside of housing, so you see the bare cable, you got to bear in mind that those are exposed to the elements. They're exposed to your sweat maybe. They're exposed to all sorts of different types of environmental things, so that's where they can get some wear as well. But generally speaking, you're going to know it when your cables need some help. And outside of, maybe some occasional lubrication, there's not a lot that you can do here. But when the cables are going, get those handled, because again, it's another thing that, I struggled. I had bad cables on this bike. One of the many things that I had to get redone when I brought it into the shop this spring. And I was just struggling with shifting. I could barely shift it, and it was because the cables were shot. And you know what? Once you replace them, you're like, oh wow, this thing. When I click it once, it actually shifts to a different gear. How nice is that? So that's a big thing to keep in mind. Not a lot you can do there, but from a maintenance perspective, spend the money and get new cables. If you can do them yourself, great. If you're a better mechanic than me, awesome. But for me, that's a local bike shop kind of a thing. Rims. This goes hand in hand with your brakes. If you have rim brakes on your bike, your rims are going to be the types of things that can go. Let me tell you a little secret though. I am riding the original wheels on my Safari. I have never replaced them, not once. And that is not a young bike. And that is a bike that has gone through quite a bit. I think that's a testament to the build quality of that particular bike. It's also something that I would say is I'm a little bit lucky too, because I know people that go through wheels like crazy. I think one of the things that's really important, one of the things that's helped me be able to maintain through these years with these same wheels, is the fact that I keep it real clean. That's the one thing that I spend time on, if I do nothing else, is to make sure that those rims are cleaned. You know, some folks say, oh, clean your rims after every single ride. Well, those people are better than me, but it is something to consider doing. It's definitely going to give those wheels a longer life. Wheels are consumables as well. Tires more so, but wheels really are the more expensive thing. So you want to try to keep those in good shape so you're not having to replace those all the time. But, you know, bear in mind, it's going to happen. These things do fail at some point. Bottom bracket. I actually had to replace my bottom bracket on this bike for the very first time. Another potential consumable. Eventually they wear out. This is the part that's sort of like where the cranks meet the bike, right? And I can't think of a part of the bike that is more important than that. That is where things are. It takes a lot of load. It takes a lot of abuse. You know, think about every time you get out of the saddle and you're standing on your pedals. Man, that's a lot of pressure and leverage that's going on this dopey little bottom bracket. You know, bottom brackets are just super, super important. And if you're feeling anything weird down there, then that's definitely something that you're going to want to replace. It's not something that goes very often. Especially on steel framed bikes, they're built like crazy, but you want to pay attention to it. Give it a look every once in a while. Make sure that everything is looking okay down there. You're going to tend to hear if something is going wrong with it, or feel it as you cycle. But bottom brackets, pay attention to those. Maybe not something that you have to deal with too much. Next one is headset. Hey, this is a recurring theme. Hey, that went on my bike recently. And why is that? Because it eventually got worn down, and the ball bearings in there, they ended up, I ended up losing ball bearings, apparently. I mean, the guy at the REI who did the work on the bike, by the way, I went to the REI, not a local bike shop. I guess I could qualify it as a local bike shop. I mean, it's local artisanal mechanics, but you know, of course it's a corporate bike shop, but it was the builder of this bike, and it was also the only thing available during COVID seasons. That's why I went there. I would go back again. They were really good. The guy who did my bike was telling me that basically a whole bunch of the ball bearings were missing, that it was rusted out, and so rusted out it actually ended up creating issues with some of the structural elements of the fork. So I had to replace the entire fork. We're going to talk about the frame of the fork in a little bit, but sometimes things can cascade. And so your headset is something that does actually need some additional protection. You got to make sure that you're opening it up and cleaning it. If it needs to be cleaned, lubing it, all of that kind of stuff. It's all super, super important. Headsets do eventually need to be replaced for every single bike. It took a while for mine, and I probably should have done it 2 years ago. I'm actually a little bummed that prior mechanics hadn't seen that being an issue. It's possible that they didn't see anything, and it just kind of all happened all at once. So make sure it's well adjusted. Make sure you've got everything in there that is okay. Give it a layer of protection when it needs it. But headsets, important. Pedals. I like cheap pedals. This is the one thing where I like flats. I don't do anything really complicated. I don't wear the special shoes. I don't strap in. I don't do anything like that. So if you do, that's all going to be really important. You got to make sure that those things are really, really well maintained and clean, and so that you can click in and click out, because that's a safety issue right there. For me, I'm a flats guy. I have $20 pedals on my bike, and frankly, I probably need to replace them. You know, sometimes I said you hear clicking sounds when things are wrong in your bottom bracket. Same is true in your pedals. Man, they just click all the time. Maybe I gotta invest in better pedals, but that's the one area where I don't really put a lot of time or love into. They just get abused. Sorry, pedals. Frame and forks. I want to talk about them. Oh no, let me talk about wheel hubs first. Wheel hubs have bearings in them as well, just like your top tube, or excuse me, your head tube. They sometimes can be replaced, and sometimes they need their cartridges and all sorts of other stuff. I'm not going to go into it too much, but what you do need to do is you got to make sure that those hubs are working properly and spinning right, because if the bearings are shot, you're going to know it, and that's just going to make your ride miserable. If you've got quick release skewers, there are some tips that I have read in certain publications that said that open and close them if they've been closed tightly for a while. If they're stuck, there may be an issue with your ability to get it off of your bike at some point, and that's going to be a problem. So you want to make sure that that's all working well. I'll know how to get your wheels off of your bike. That's a really key thing that you need. Frame and forks now. Frames last different amounts. And forks too. The fork is the part that holds your front wheel. You probably knew that. Depending on what they're made out of, depending on how often you ride it, the type of weather, the abuse you give it, that's going to impact the lifespan of it. If you keep things clean, then it's going to last much longer. If you only ride once a week, or once every few weeks, well, it's probably going to last longer. Do you store it outside? Do you store it inside? What are the conditions? All of these things are factors. The better that you can do to keep your bike inside, if you've got that as an option, do it. If it's outside, consider a cover. A cover's not going to do everything, but it's going to do something. Trying to keep your bike frame and forks out of extreme conditions is going to help extend the life of your bike. So make sure you do all of that. Also make sure that you are really spending some time taking a close look at your frame and your forks, because the problem is that very occasionally, you're going to find structural problems in there. Maybe this is going to be more, well, this will happen on steel frame bikes too, but the carbon folks, the second you've got anything like that, it can be a problem. So make sure that you're checking out to see if there's any cracks or any other types of things that look like you're getting some kind of weakness. I have never had that problem on any of my bikes in my entire life. I've never busted a frame. I've heard lots of people who have. Maybe it's because I don't ride my bike as hard as other people do, but yeah. I do have to say, I had a mountain bike in Portland when I lived there that I eventually, I think I donated it, but it was slightly askew. I think I did bend the frame in some way, because I rode that bike rougher than any other bike in my life. And that includes this bike that I've ridden tens of thousands of miles on. Two things that I want, and one I've already talked about, is you got to make sure that you're inspecting your stuff as best as possible. Does that mean you got to get a magnifying glass out and look at everything at a microscopic level? Of course not. No, just give it a good overview. And the other big thing, clean that bike as much as practicable. At the end of a season, I need to do a better job of cleaning my bike, because I tend to find that it's at the beginning of a new season that I'm actually doing more cleaning. Now, I'm trying to ride year round for the last couple of years. And so, my bike is getting a lot of abuse in the winter. And so cleaning more often when your bike gets dirtier is a good thing. I ride this bike on the C&O a lot, and that is a disaster for getting small dirt, small clay-like particles in there. Man, spray it down, dry it off, get it clean. It's a really, really good thing for you to do, and will help make your bike do better things for you. It will perform better, and it will last longer. So anyways, those are just sort of my tips for keeping your bike around, improving the lifespan of your bike, and having it be your partner, if you will, for longer than that. So anyways, thank you, gentle listener, whoever you are, for sending that text, because I think that was a really good set of tips for folks out there. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours like the Kessel Run. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Avilas Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latois Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Piroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messinger, David Grotke, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lecko, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCulloch, John Hickman, Jack Smith, Carl Presso, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Dave Fletcher, James Stratakis, David Neves, Mike Lazewski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, and new to the society, David Weil. And thanks also to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.